After years of trying, I've managed to achieve a long-term goal I set myself of riding a 10-mile time trial in 18 minutes. That's an average speed of 52 kilometers an hour. Now, I'm delighted to have ticked this off, but I'm not especially talented when it comes to riding a bike. However, I've managed to achieve this by a combination of training smart and meticulous planning and kit selection. And I'm going to share with you exactly how I've done it. I've always liked setting myself goals, and for me the definition of a good goal is one that when you first set it yourself, you're not actually sure whether or not you can actually do it. And in my case, riding 10 miles in under 19 minutes was definitely that. But whatever your goal, whether it's riding 10 miles as fast as you can or some epic Gran Fondo, whatever, the best way to approach it is to reverse engineer it and think, what are the things that I need to be able to do or improve on in order to be able to complete this goal, and work on each one of those aspects. This was going to take everything I had, including improving bike and kit tech. I love tech and I will get onto that, but there's no escaping it. Even with all the best tech in the world, if you're going to ride 10 miles in 18 something, you need to be able to pedal hard. So to help me improve, I enlisted the help of a coach called Jodie Warrington. Now, Jodie went about setting me sessions in training peaks that were tailored to improve my anaerobic power, so the power that I can produce over my sort of FTP threshold power, and also improving my ability to recover between those efforts. Now, this was important because when you actually analyse a 10-mile time trial, you realise that, well, it's not in a velodrome, it's not flat, and it's outdoors. It's not a steady state effort like you would do on the turbo or on a climb for 18 to 20 minutes. There are turns where you don't pedal at all, or there are slight uphill sections, or there are headwinds, or there are tailwinds. And you need to be able to go harder where the race is harder, because you stand to gain more time there as a general rule of thumb. So in the sections where you're, say, going uphill or into a headwind, you need to be able to actually put out more power on those bits. Now, something I want to stress is a misconception that I kind of come up against quite a lot, which is people tend to think that as a GCN presenter, I just ride my bike all the time. Now, while sometimes I'm very fortunate to actually get paid to ride a bike as part of my job, that's not very common. The vast majority of my time is actually spent working, writing, planning, doing all sorts of stuff. And so I have to fit my training in and around that, and also other family commitments as well. So while training for 10s, I was typically averaging around 10 to 12 hours a week. And you can see all my training and riding on Strava. I'm totally transparent, I upload everything. So you can see that the vast majority of that was on the turbo after work, because I'm better at riding in an evening. I'm not very good at doing hard sessions in the morning. That works better for me, so I do that. And also then doing rides at weekends. But yeah, you can see it all on there. Jodie identified that I had a good, but not amazing, VO2 max, but my anaerobic power above that wasn't super high. I'm not especially punchy, and because we identified it's not a steady state effort, we needed to improve upon that. So I'm going to give some context here. At the time, my FTP was around 320, 325 watts, but that doesn't tell the whole story because you need to be able to produce power above that. So people often do get too fixated just on a pure FTP number, but it doesn't fully tell you what a rider can actually do in real life situations. And to explain what I mean by that, this is how the race went down. So I've got some notes here. Now, for the first 3 minutes of my 18-minute ride, I did 370 watts. Now, that's considerably over my FTP, and that was because it was into a slight headwind. And then I had a turn where, at that roundabout, I soft pedalled and did very little and could actually recover on the turn. Then there was a slight uphill section where I did around 340 watts for 3 minutes. And then I did an 8-minute section where there was a downhill and a flat with a slight tailwind where I did just 320 watts for 8 minutes. Then I was a turn again where I could recover a bit more and soft pedaled and didn't really pedal. And then I did 345 watts to the finish for 3 to 4 minutes. So my training reflected that. It gave me the punch that was required in order to do those efforts above my sort of threshold power and then recover a little bit and go again. You may have seen my video where I spoke about how I got to 5 watts per kilo. Now, the rough structure of my training week while training for time trials was roughly similar to that, in that the majority of my training was at zone 2 intensity, with 2 hard sessions a week typically. Now, one of those hard sessions was a key session aimed at improving my anaerobic system. I should also stress that while training for and racing in time trials, I've been a couple of kilos heavier than when I was aimed at pure power to weight watts per kilo last year. I should stress though that for a flat time trial, and one of the nice things about it is being as light as possible isn't a key determinant of performance. You don't have to worry about that too much. Getting the power out is far more important. Now, this key anaerobic session started out with 5 by 5 minutes. Now, that 5 minutes started with 1 minute super hard, which was sort of 370 to 400 watts. And then I had to sort of active recover into 4 minutes at around 300 watts. Now, when I first started this was pretty hard, but the idea behind it was that it was training my body to be better at clearing and utilizing lactate. Now, over the course of 4 weeks, it got progressively harder in manageable steps till after 4 weeks, it had become 5 by 8 minute intervals, where that first minute was at like 400 watts, and then it was 300 watts for 6 minutes, and then 1 minute super hard at the end at 400 watts. And with less rest between those intervals as well. So if I tried to do that harder session from the off, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But I progressively just got it harder and harder and harder, thanks to Jodie, and was able to achieve it and improve and get stronger. Also, another key detail, to get the most bang for my buck out of my training, the vast majority of it has been indoors on the Wahoo Kicker. And that's because it's just more time efficient with the limited time I've got. But I do still try to ride outside on a weekend. Overall, I managed to average 330 watts for a time of 18 minutes 40, which was a massive PB for me, and I felt really proud to achieve that. And it might not sound like much watts to you, or it might sound like a lot of watts to you, depending on who you are. I would say it's certainly possible to ride an 18-minute 10 off less watts than that, especially if you're more aerodynamic than me. But the important thing to remember is just to try and be as small as possible on the bike and as still as possible, as this will help make you more aerodynamic. Training smart is just one component though, and a really useful bit of tech that I've used is a website called mywindsock.com. Now, full disclosure, mywindsock.com hasn't sponsored this video or sponsored us. It's just a website that I find really useful and I do use. And well, I think it's a really useful tool if you're trying to plan some kind of time trial where you're trying to optimize your performance. And the reason for that is because you can take a course off Strava, you can upload it into mywindsock.com, and then you can select a specific time and day, and it will combine weather forecast data to see what the course is doing. Is it running fast? Is the weather good? Is it bad? And where the wind is. And now this is crucial because, as I alluded to earlier, you want to try and ride harder where the course is slower. So that might be into a headwind, as you stand to gain more by pushing more when you're going slower. So this allows you to create a pacing plan and also experiment and be able to see where you should spend your watts. So you can look at the effects of, say, riding with just flat pacing. So that would be in the case of me, I averaged 330 watts. If I just raced at a flat 330 watts throughout the entire race versus doing what I actually did, which was push harder into harder sections like slight uphills or slight headwinds and then really back off on fast sections, you can see that there's actually a considerable time saving to be made there where you go considerably faster. Now, you know, it might only be in the region of 10 seconds, but 10 seconds could be the difference between you achieving your goal or not achieving your goal. And when you factor in that, well, I'd got so agonizingly close on a number of occasions. I'd done 1914, 1904, 1902. I was just like, oh, you know, you're really thinking, what if I'd just done something slightly different? In theory, on those rides, it would have been possible for me to do an 18 if I'd just planned it a bit better using a tool like this. Next is Recon. Now, this is something that I mentioned in a time trial tips video a couple of months back, but I want to give an example of how I've actually put this into practice. So it's common for riders to be faster on a course that they know or have reconned or have ridden before. This is because you can just simply find seconds in places, like you know the lay of the land, you know where the smooth bits of tarmac are, you know the turns, you learn them, you learn how to take them faster, just things like that. It's pretty common sense. So definitely go out and try and ride a course or recon a course before you race on it if you're trying to be as fast as possible. Now, Strava is pretty useful for this as well, especially the flybys feature. It allows you to analyze bits of the course and how you compare to other people that have ridden it. So this is something that you can do once you've actually ridden the course once before. Now, the big thing for me was the turns on this particular course. There are two big turns, and when I looked at my previous rides, I could see that I was losing time on the turns. Now, I was a few seconds slower than people who had actually gone faster than overall, and this suggested to me that I was being too cautious on the turns, and I could actually make up some pretty free time there. And so that's exactly what I did. But the usefulness was seeing Strava actually telling me that gave me the impetus to actually do it. So, for example, on the first turn of this course, I can see my results of that. Now, when I did 1902 in May, I did 53 seconds around the turn, okay? Now, when I actually did my goal, I did 51 seconds around the first turn and off lower power. And that's just because I cornered better. And that's the difference right there, which is like, you know, things like that you don't necessarily think about. On the second turn as well, I would have achieved my goal just by cornering faster. Because on the second turn, I did it in 19 seconds. And when I did it in May, I did it in 22 seconds. So overall on the turns, I've saved 5 seconds, which, well, that's a lot, isn't it? Because it's for free. But my favourite bits of tech are obviously the bike and all the kit. You don't have to go and spend money on that stuff. You can just set a different goal and adjust the goalposts and just say you're riding against yourself, because I'm essentially riding against myself when I do this kind of thing. I'm just very lucky to have the benefit of amazing bike and kit. But the things to prioritise are position and what you cover it in. So your clothing and your skin suit. And a good tip is that you can make a sort of a decent skin suit often much better by simply getting it tailored to fit you a bit better and remove some creases. So there are plenty of adjustment shops and shops that offer tailoring services or adjustment to clothing, and just by getting them to tailor it a little bit and take it in places to remove some creases, you can make it significantly more aerodynamic. And this can be much cheaper than spending a lot more money on a custom skin suit. However, one of the biggest gains that I've made with regards to sort of kit and position is my helmet choice, which I changed before I actually achieved my goal of 18 minutes. So this is a Met drone. Now, big caveat here, helmets are an individual thing. They're system dependent. So the fastest helmet on me probably isn't or might not be the fastest helmet on you. But something we do see when we test helmets in the wind tunnel are there are certain helmets which, if you're going to put money on it, they generally do perform better on a much wider range of people, whereas there's some helmets which are kind of just very unique, very uniquely perform well on certain individuals. And I'd argue that the Met Drone is one of those helmets that seems to perform quite well on a wide range of people. Now, the crazy thing is, we went to the wind tunnel with our unofficial wind tunnel engineer, the bike tailor, if you're after a custom bike, he's your man. And while we were in there, we were testing out the Met TT helmets. They have the Codatronica as well, and this, the Met Drone, because Met had just come on board as GCN's helmet sponsor. Now, I was wearing the Met Drone, and my size in a Met Drone, or any helmet, is a medium. However, Stephen, the bike tailor, suggested I should try a large. This seemed counterintuitive to me, because a large is more frontal area, it's bigger, and I don't need it. But when we tried the large over the medium, which I've got here, I mean, you can see the size difference in the two. The large is considerably bigger. We found that the large was actually faster. Now, we can speculate that this might be because it's better at sort of guiding the airflow over my shoulders, because it's a little bit wider. And we have seen, Ineos using wider casque helmets with visors on and things that are wider. And it might be for that reason too. Also, the POC temper helmet kind of has that effect going on. But whatever the reason, we found it was 7 watts faster than that one, the medium, at 45 kilometres an hour. Now, given my target race speed was around 52 kilometres an hour average, that's a considerably bigger saving. And you're looking easily at least 10 watts saved there, which is a huge gain. Oh, and I've subsequently spotted that Tadej Pogacar, previously using the Codatronica helmet, has now switched to a large Met Drone. And also several riders that aren't even sponsored by Met are using the Met Drone in a large, unbranded. So I spotted Stefan Kung has been using it, used it at the Tour as well. And Mads Pedersen, who did a great time trial at the Tour de France, also using it unbranded. And when riders use something that they're not sponsored by, unbranded, kind of, read between the lines. Probably means it's good. I've got the bike behind me, which is the beautiful Canyon Speedmax UCI version. Now, I've done actually a bike check video on this, so I'm not going to go into all the details of it again. There are a couple of little things I'm going to show you though. So, firstly, the chainring. I had a smaller chainring on before. I swapped that out for a 58 because at 52k an hour, I can get better chain line efficiency with a 58. So, riding in the middle of the block, I had a 54 on before. Also, that's a solid ring, just because a solid ring is a little bit more aerodynamic than having one with holes in. Although I haven't actually measured that, I'm guessing. Also, these little lights, we've put them in a video from cheap Amazon products before. These cost very little. You just pick them up online. But they're ideal because in time trials in the UK, you have to have lights front and rear. I mean, even if you didn't have to have lights front and rear, it's kind of a sensible thing to have on, especially, when you're on racing on open roads. And these are small with little LEDs in them. They don't take up much space, so they're not going to aerodynamically ruin your bike like some big lights might do. And they don't weigh much, and they can just easily be attached to places. So I just sort of strap it onto the back of the saddle here like this. You sort of barely know it's there. Got one on the front as well. With regards to kit and position though, the biggest thing that I can say to you is just practice at making yourself small on the bike and holding a good still position, like I've said before. Wind tunnels and aero testing are great, but they are expensive, and you can get 90% there just by looking at your position, analysing photos of when you've been racing, or getting people to take photos and videos of you as you ride past, or using things like mirrors when you're on the turbo trainer so that you can look at your position side on and also front on, because you want to be as narrow as possible. And just When you're selecting a helmet, try and get one that just integrates nicely with your shoulders and also your back. And you don't want to be riding a helmet where if it's got a tail, you're riding with your tail like stuck up into the wind. That's not very aerodynamic. Another thing I've done is consistent core training, little and often. I try to manage 10 minutes each day, but admittedly, I don't always achieve that. Leg raisers, slow mountain climbers and rollouts are all great exercises that help with hip flexor strength, which is particularly useful for getting the power out in an aero position where your hip angle is typically tighter. Regarding nutrition, it's just carbs. So it begins the night before. I'll have a high carb meal, either rice or pasta based, and try and not have it too heavy. So try and limit the amount of sort of fat that's in there. And then on the day of the target event I'm doing, 2 hours before, have a load more carbs. And my go-to way to do this is to make bircher muesli. I'll also make sure I've just got a bottle with some carbs in it, so like some beta fuel or something. I can just be sipping constantly in the sort of hour before I do the target race, just so I'm keeping the glycogen topped up. And then when I start my warm-up, sort of 20-30 minutes before the race, I might have like a gel or like a beta fuel jelly or something, just so I've got a load of, hit of carbs ready to smash the race. One final thing that I do for 10-mile time trials when I really want to perform at my best is actually take bicarb. Now, there's lots of science and papers published on this. I'm not going to go into all of the detail of it now because it feels like it's a whole nother subject for a whole nother video. But the rough protocol I do is around the literature, which suggests you should take between 0.1 and 0.15 grams per kilogram of body weight, which to me equates as around 20 grams of bicarb, which I will split into two 10-gram doses, 90 minutes and 60 minutes before my event. And I find that this, helps me go a little bit harder because the quick science is that bicarb helps buffer lactate. And so you feel kind of less of a burn when you're doing hard anaerobic efforts, typically below 12 minutes long. So in a 10-mile time trial, I feel that does actually give me something. The big downsides of bicarb is that for some people they have gastrointestinal problems with it. I have quite a strong constitution, so it isn't a problem for me. But the other thing is water retention. You're taking on a huge amount of sodium and salt, which can make you a couple of kilos heavier in water the next day. Now, if you're doing a one-off 10-mile time trial, it's not really an issue, is it? So for that reason, I'm happy to go with it. One notable thing I don't do is take caffeine before a race. I've experimented with and without it in a controlled way, and it doesn't seem to help me. So yeah, I just don't take it. However, I do love a cup of coffee and do regularly drink coffee, but just for enjoyment. Right, well, there you have it. I hope you found this useful. Like I say, I'm not especially talented when it comes to riding a bike. I just really try hard to make the most of what I do have, be consistent, and just train smart. If you found this useful, then please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you've got any questions about how I've trained or things I've done, fire them down in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer as many of them as I can. I'm going to go now. Love you. Bye.